Well, we're going to transition to our panel presentation. We're just queuing up the other speakers to join us. And there are other questions in the Q&A that I think actually will be great for the panel discussion. And so, Zach, I will probably call on you again to answer some of these. Some great questions coming in, and we'll just bring the other three back and have a full panel presentation next. And if anyone wants to answer a question, just raise your hand or give me a nod so I can call on you. Or you can call out one of your fellow speakers if you think they'll be the best one to answer something. But yeah, I mean, I'll just point straight to the question in the Slido right now, which was one I had actually written down, which is sort of prioritizing what we look at when we're coming into this. It seems like there's a lot of important factors, but what do you see as the most important aspects of this to look at? Is it the design? Is it long-term operation? Is it location or habitat? And there's differences among species. So is there a need to really look at a species or life stage specific view of this? Or is it really just all of the above? But I know we often have limited capacity or resources. So I'll just start with that. Anyone want to tackle that? I mean, maybe Zach will just go to you and then we'll tee off the other panel members after you.
Yeah, I think all three of the other panel members are probably more adept to answer this, but I mean the obvious answer is all of the above. If you could have the best tide gate in the world, if it doesn't touch water, you're never going to see a fish approach it. If you don't have any fish as a source population, you're for one thing, you're not going to have a huge impact, and the second thing is you're not going to be able to monitor how effective that structure is. So I'll hand it off to the other. I mean these other panelists are much more experienced than I am for that, but those are my initial thoughts.
Anyone want to jump in there?
Quickly, all of the above. I totally
Yeah.
agree. And everything that's being listed there are things that need to be paid attention to. Yeah, if you just do one thing, you have a killer design and you don't evaluate it, how it works, what's the usefulness of that? You do need to monitor, you need to look for all those different elements that were listed in the question. Absolutely. Dan, sorry, I interrupted. I jumped ahead of you.
That's quite all right. I guess I might just hop in and name one thing that is maybe kind of hidden in the operations, but like it might be easy to underestimate how important it is. Like who is taking on the management and responsibility for this thing? Because you can find the greatest piece of salmon habitat and maybe you have the money to kind of manage it for 50 to 75 years, but chances are you might not. So, and maintain it and make sure that you're not getting a bunch of debris or beavers hanging out there, all that stuff. So it's really important that you have like partners, landowners, or whatever you need that's going to be able to watch over this thing long term.
Very good point. I would bring that in that context. We had an experience with Zach visiting a Tigate that had been replaced by a newer design, and somehow nobody knew who was responsible for maintaining it and making sure that it worked. And when we visited the site, the thing was closed 24/7, and people in the area that had worked on the Tigate and had obtained the funding were not aware of it. And apparently somebody, maybe a landowner, decided to play with it and fix it in a position that he or she liked, and it was creating problems. So people cannot walk away from these structures. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, in Oregon, we use water management plans. They're built into every one of our Tidegate projects, to try to make it clear who's responsible for operation. It's a maintenance agreement, but it needs to be understood by all parties. I feel that it needs to be written into the very beginning of the project. We shouldn't even start designing or fundraising for a project if we don't know who's going to take care of it over a long period of time. Now, if the question was directed at what are the biggest parameters to look at in tide gates, I think Zach answered that. So I don't know what the question was coming from, but the gate openness, when the gate is open, that optimal time, and probably velocity. I mean, those are, if you're talking about just fish passage and operation, those are the two big ones that I would say above all else.
Great.
Great, that's super helpful. Let's, I guess, step back before you're at that sort of design phase. How can you guys offer up suggestions on getting more of the engagement and getting the buy-in? Dan shared that, you know, in the Lower Mainland here in BC, but it's coming from First Nations a lot of the time, who are kind of doing kickstarting, raising the awareness for the problem. Sounds like private ownership, private landowners are much more the players that you're dealing with in Oregon. But what are some suggestions for getting the momentum behind these projects? Is it incentives, compensation? Where I guess a lot of different angles might need to be taken. Any thoughts? Who would like to start there? I saw some heads nodding.
I don't mind starting.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, like you said, in Oregon, we are dealing with a lot of private landowners, mostly private landowners when it comes to these gates. And I mean, first and foremost, we need to recognize that private landowners and producers are stretched thin. They don't want one more task, even if they agree it's a good task. You have to approach them with ideas that reduce their workload, and you have to be a trusted ambassador and develop a relationship. And I don't mean just a relationship with one person for a short amount of time. I'm talking about someone that's there before, during the life of the project, and someone that could be there long term. So these trusted ambassadors we've heard over and over and over again really resonate in the community, and they're people that are in the community. They're not me, the Nature Conservancy, coming from Eugene, Oregon. They're someone that lives, you know, next door. They're your outreach personnel from your watershed councils and people like that. And sometimes you might need to approach a project with their goals in mind first. Not everyone is interested in fish, believe it or not. I've been told. I don't know what these people are, but not everybody. Yeah. What else? And I would, yeah, I'll leave. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I mean, I get that. I think I said it in my presentation, but you know, most of the people are working on very thin profit margins, and we can talk about money. We can, you know, the price of this infrastructure is outside what's achievable for most, if not all, landowners nowadays. But if a gate fails and a land floods and you're impacted, you're in a much worse situation. That's much higher impact, and it's much more expensive to retroactively go back and try to fix a problem. So being proactive is always good.
Absolutely, great points. Anyone else on the panel who'd like to chime in? Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I'd chime in just because it's interesting to hear Jason's experience, and you're working mostly with private landowners, and probably the context is quite different. So maybe just to provide a different view, like up in the Lower Mainland, we're in this, as I pointed out, kind of heavily developing and like increasingly popular place to be. So the responsibility mostly falls on local governments. So, I mean, it's a tricky balance to like, what is the priority of a local government? And it might just be one of those champions inside. Like, this is one thing that maybe we haven't touched on. I maybe said it a little bit with, like, say, Mike Pearson, but the agency of an individual within an organization to kind of unlock opportunities can be quite huge. So in some cases, like, you can do all the prioritizing you want, and it's great that those tools exist. At the end of the day, you need to find somebody that's interested and willing to go along with this idea and cares about fish, or find a way to make them care, like Jason is saying. Yeah.
I'd also just add one quick thought. I think that monitoring is important for building that trust. To be honest, it's hard to put in a structure and say, yeah, we're pretty sure it's fish friendly, and then there's no data or follow-up to show how it actually changed water flow or fish movement or habitat access or whatever it may be. Salinity, some people are concerned, obviously a lot of agriculture is concerned with salinity in those floodplain systems upstream. And I think having a rigorous monitoring schedule and deliverables for all partner organizations can build a lot of that trust and understanding for what is the importance of this work, and after it's done, what is the importance of reporting what we did and what we found.
Yeah, excellent points there, Zach. That proof of concept piece, and we need the monitoring data for that. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to pop it over to Greer to ask a next question.
Guillermo, did you have one more comment on that?
Yes, very briefly. I totally second what Zach was saying about monitoring. I just want to highlight that funding for monitoring is always an afterthought, and it's like 2% of the budget, 1% of the budget, 5% of the budget, and that's why in many cases we don't have clear answers because we have invested $1 billion maybe or more, according to some studies in salmon habitat restoration, and we know very little about the real impacts and effects. So that needs to change, or we will continue in this situation where we cannot explain what the benefits are for the investment. That's all.
Well, lots of great points, telling our story and using monitoring data to help tell that story to landowners if and when they come to us. So the next question, I think, probably ties to a few of your presentations where you touched on it, but maybe not in a lot of detail, but just getting deeper into sharing how you're taking climate change into consideration. Obviously, on both sides of this, there's going to be impacts from climate change. So how are you taking that into account in your decision making? And maybe I'll just start with you, Jason, because you mentioned that it was a factor used in your optimization, and then we'll go to some others.
Yeah, reference to the optimization tool, as I said, we're able to run different scenarios using different sea level rise projections, and that is going to show you where your inundation or your potential inundation in estuaries and in floodplains is going to be. And that's going to show you whether you're thinking glass half full or glass half empty, what the impacts or benefits could be. In some cases, what we refer to sometimes as landward migration zones, or those areas of change, you're going to build habitat. You're going to actually get more of those floodplain habitats. In a lot of cases, we're going to bump up against landforms, bump up against elevations, and we're going to lose habitats. So you're able to project kind of in the future, what would be the benefit of a tide gate project on a species if we're thinking about those inundated habitats. The reverse side is we can also see that in the future we're probably going to have change in river flows, change in snowpack, change in our peak precipitation events and things like that are going to negatively impact those working landscapes, whether they be the farmlands that I keep referring to, or, as I showed, all the miles and all the miles of roads and railroads, or municipal and private buildings that could be impacted. So, like Zach and others, I think were mentioning, we're not making decisions for today. We're making decisions that should be considering looking out, at least 50 years or more. So if we're just putting in a project based on today's conditions, we're really selling it short.
Anyone else want to jump in? Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I could add, I kind of touched on this already, but well, we do know, like, I don't have as fancy prioritization tool as Jason. That sounds pretty great. I wish we did have one, but like, we do know when we're looking at sites that we're dealing with likely a reduced freshet flood risk because we're not going to get quite the same kind of snowpack with increased temperatures. So not going to be as big a freshet, but we're going to have these bigger atmospheric rivers in the winter, so more upland kind of flooding, and then we know we're going to have this increased sea level rise. So, I mean, we're taking that into account when we're approaching folks, but I guess this also points to the fact that usually when we're talking to the folks that want these replacements, they're also hopefully kind of aware of the climate change challenge they're dealing with. So I think often the proponents can help us navigate those priorities too.
Anyone else want to answer this question? Okay.
I don't want to repeat what's already being very well explained by Jason and Dan, but sea level rise is basically the elephant in the room, and we want, as much as I would like to remove tide gates, because I mentioned, if you didn't notice, that the best tide gate is no tide gate. I think we're stuck. We will need to, people will demand for them in the infrastructure in the future, and funding will become available, and we will have to think of how to design the best possible tide gates that have the least possible environmental impact.
Great. Go ahead, Dan. Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, just a really quick note on that, because for those kind of in the know, it does mean that probably a lot of tidal scenarios, maybe not in the Oregon context, but definitely in the lower mainland, a lot of those gates will probably be starting to convert to pump stations, because really pumps will get those higher waters, and those conditions really might necessitate a move to a pump station, which is really kind of unfortunate. But we need to have better pump station technologies when that time comes, and there are some much better ones than what's been out there so far.
And just a last thought on opening up this floodplain habitat not only has the benefit of allowing fish into that specific area, but the reason that water moves so quick through the river system and results in these huge runoff events in these big atmospheric rivers is because we have no water retention in these floodplain habitats. So like taking like Sumas Valley, Sumas Lake as an example, that lake provided a lot of a buffer for some of these major water events. And because there's no storage of water in the system, it flows right through. And so we have a rain event one day and the next day the river's up. We don't have that kind of buffer built in. And so reopening some of this habitat and allowing it to accept more water can have benefits well beyond the area where the restoration work is being done. That's my last thought.
Well, Laura, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. And Zach, you've made a great plug for our next workshop in November, and that is really, it just extends this conversation sort of up the watershed a little bit into the floodplains. And so I'm glad that you're giving us a little bit of a promo there, planting the seed for that November workshop on the 18th. So looking to our next question that's sitting at the top with Five Lakes, we'll ask that one here. How are farmers and agricultural groups involved in this problem? I think we've indirectly recognized they're an important player, especially when we're talking about private land ownership, but agriculture and efforts to restore water ecosystems often clash. As Zach alluded to, is there a way to find common ground so both farming and healthy waterways can thrive together? Anyone would like to kind of, jump into that, which is really extending what Zach started there with his last response.
I'd nominate Jason.
Oh, we're getting to that point of the day.
No, I could go on it, dude.
How can agriculture be involved? Is that, I'm sorry, you couldn't see the question.
Yeah,
there.
just getting them engaged, getting them to sort of socialize these types of projects, I think, and recognizing the importance to promote them, and I guess toning down fears and apprehensions around how managing water in a different way can possibly put their livelihood as producers at risk. Handling that, I think.
Well, I think first and foremost, having the best advocate for a project is probably another farmer, a neighbor. It's those coffee shop talks. It doesn't come often from the conservation group or, outsiders, so to speak. So I think that having people sharing the results of their own projects is best, I think talking about water management, as you were referring to, is a great one. I also was I was thinking as Dan was talking about the differences in Oregon and British Columbia, that one overlapping and inclusive type of conversation might be that water management conversation, because if you live along an estuary, if you live along a river, you get flooded, and people don't like to be flooded, whether it's municipality, whether it's private land or whatever. These newer gates do a better job of water management, and in certain cases they can adjust for or help with flood resiliency, because in certain cases they can be left open during our winter, high water events. I've had a farmer say to me that I don't have production in the wintertime. I don't have cows out in the field in the wintertime. I'm happy to leave my gate open if it helps so-and-so downstream or upstream of me take off a little bit of pressure, because it's all about spreading and slowing water, as Zach was just mentioning. And, as much as we've converted these systems and cut off our floodplains, any of these projects can blow their whistle for helping with some of those, the flood resiliency issues that we're all going to face. Dan's biting at the bit to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer that Jason just gave. And I guess like we shouldn't just shove it under the carpet, but like there's going to be some ways where some farmers are just not going to be interested to have salmon in their ditches. That's kind of that's a problem for them. They might see that as a problem, but not all farmers. You can't just like treat them like a monolith. So I think like Jason was alluding to, there are those farmers out there that do care about salmon, grew up fishing and all this kind of stuff. So you can't just paint them all with the same brush. But it is a concern for some groups. This is an opportunity to kind of plug the Farmland Advantage program that is run by Dave Zender up here in BC. And it's like a really amazing example of an effort that goes out and kind of pays for ecosystem services for farmers to basically take care of their ditches, plant good plants, and make that riparian habitat. And that has flood resilience benefits as well. So I guess when it comes to the tide gates themselves, I guess, sorry if I got off track there, but it's not always obvious that how that will come in. I think I feels like it should be mentioned that there are quite a few systems, and I think I saw a question earlier that basically a lot of creek and slough systems are being used as irrigation water with floodgates, and that's like kind of unfortunate. And I don't like this is one of those things where I don't know if we have a solution to that because they're kind of at cross purposes. So yeah, it's a big topic, and it's not easy. Last thing, the Floodplains by Design program in Washington really seems to have nailed this mix of getting tribes and farmers in the agriculture sector and the flood districts like in the room together. So I often envy their ability to do that.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're bringing up some of these other resources that people online can take a look at, offline when we're finished today, both those programs. And both your responses, Jason and yourself, Dan, touched on the flood management piece. And I see a question from Craig Sutherland with Kerwood Lytle. And I think that is worth bringing in. We're all here coming together thinking about fish passage and how we can improve that. But how much does flood management come into the prioritization piece, shopping around for where we might want to do it and how it's incorporated into the design? Is that a big piece of the work that's being done for these projects? I'm sort of directing this a little differently, but yeah, if anyone would like to
I would say
touch on that
specifically
flood management.
flood management was not part of the optimization process, but water management on the working landscape is of the highest priority on the Oregon coast. Water management means where you can, in freshwater systems, flood irrigate properties for better forage and such. It also means that you can move cattle onto a landscape earlier in the season after our normal winter flooding. You can get out earlier and you can stay on longer later in the season, in the fall season. And those directly correlate to how many days you have production happening with cattle, how many pounds, and what your pocketbook looks like. So it translates into dollars and cents.
Yeah, Dan, I saw your hand up
I
there.
can chime in here, and nice to see you, Craig. Craig was that engineer that helps to install that self-regulating floodgate in Colony Farm many years ago. So yeah, how is flood management being considered? I think this goes back to the way we prioritized sites, and it was rather than using tools, really, we were more approaching it from an engagement perspective. So we're looking to the proponents, especially local governments and First Nations, to understand their kind of flood needs and flood risk. Unfortunately, that's not the kind of thing that's very easy for us to take into account. But yeah, I think that's the way we do it. If they know that they are fearing kind of an outdated floodgate, or they're fearing these kinds of flood risks that are actually already happening to their communities, then that's where we can plug that in the midst of the many benefits we want to provide.
Great, thanks. Yeah, any last thoughts from anyone before I pass it off to Greer to ask a next question?
I have one last thought. So One thing I was going to mention is that agricultural land is not just a concern for agriculture. Agricultural land is some of the most productive overwintering habitat for birds, for example. So considering the fact that if we do either inundate certain areas that aren't going to be agriculturally productive in changing systems or whatever it may be, something to consider is the fact that that is also habitat for species, and it's habitat that we've created and now have to maintain. So if you're taking away farmland, you might have to consider what other species are using that. And the other thing I was going to mention is that we're considering this as like tide gates are the only thing that are determining how much water can go upstream of a site. But one thing to consider is that you can pair your tide gate restorations with upstream restoration work. So, for example, at Wilson Farm, where our self-regulating gate went in, there was also the addition of these fingerling channels that didn't add to the water level. So it didn't, nothing that was done at the gate was going to change the water level. But what it did was it allowed more water to build up by actually expanding the volume of water that could be held at that water level. And so that's something to consider, is that tide gates are not our only lever. And you can replace a tide gate, allow for more normal function of water flow, and then reinforce that with restoration upstream to expand the amount of water that can be held in that system without causing flooding. Something to think about.
That's a good point, Zach. I don't want anybody to think that we're just talking about tide gate replacement as a one-off or the entire project. And when I talked about bringing conservation dollars to the table to do this work earlier, it wasn't for gates specifically. It was because we were also coupling that with enhancing, improving floodplain or tidal wetland habitats behind the gates. It's so critical. Providing that shade, habitat complexity, it only makes a project much more successful for water quality, fish, wildlife, etc. So, thanks for bringing that up, Zach.
Yeah, great.
Dan, go
I saw
ahead.
Dan as well. Yeah.
Just a really quick addition on the land value piece. Like once again, the Lower Mainland is just so complex and competitive for all the different land uses that are going on. So that's just it's tricky. You pair that with the fact, and it hasn't been mentioned yet, so it's maybe worth mentioning, is the Fraser River is huge, right? It's 1,400 kilometers. It's a lot of water. The unfortunate truth is, while opening some of these waterways, like even the Sumas Lake, could mitigate some of that kind of freshet-oriented flood risk, it's not going to kind of stop that giant Fraser River. So this is a bit of a tricky part. I mean, as atmospheric rivers get bigger and bigger, then some of that water storage question gets more attractive. So that's a good aspect of it, I guess. But yeah, lots of competing land values going on here. And right now, the BC government, I would say, is encouraging communities to develop more in the floodplain. So tricky stuff.
Yeah, a little bit tricky, kind of in the wrong direction. I will pass it to Greer. I think we move on to the next question.
Well, and I see we'll have time to answer the one at the top, but I do want to ask an associated question to this. To me, what struck home is really this is going to be a growing problem. It already is. If we have failing infrastructure, we have increased floods, sea level rise. Like, this is only going to get to be a bigger problem, but maybe also a bigger opportunity. Do you generally see the kickstart to projects being landowners with the problem coming to you, and do they know who to go to? I mean, obviously, as you said, Jason, it's sometimes word of mouth, but it doesn't feel like an obvious sort of restoration type where landowners have a problem, they know who to go to. And then also, when they go to someone, does that person know how to approach that situation as an opportunity to do restoration as well as fixing some of their problems? So I'll just leave it there. Any thoughts on that?
I think our frontline communicators along the coast are, I've said many times, our watershed councils, our soil and water conservation districts, our land trusts. And if they don't know, they don't know, if they're not doing the projects, they know who to talk to. So I think we've done enough communication along the coast of Oregon through that outreach and through a lot of town halls and such that I'd be surprised if someone had, a tide gate issue that couldn't pretty quickly connect the dots or find someone that connect dots for them.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I would like to hear from Dan because I'm not sure watershed councils as they exist in Oregon and they are supported with lottery funds are that common an occurrence at present in both BC and also in Washington for those of you from Washington. Here, I think we have a particularly good situation where lottery funds are directed specifically to support these small NGOs that are part of the community and can do the type of work and are connected to the landowners the way that Jason was mentioning, but I'm not sure that's the situation elsewhere. And therefore, you're probably a little bit handicapped in achieving these goals. I know there are partnerships that manage rivers. I was involved with one a long time ago in Langley, but I think that many of them actually went kaput over the years.
Any thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I could respond, like, because I've been following this pretty closely. Like, yeah, we don't really have, certainly not watershed councils. I think we have a kind of sporadic amount of kind of watershed watchers, including like the Watershed Watch Salmon Society, but they kind of are spread out across a lot of issues. We have stream keepers, and their like contributions shouldn't be minimized, but like watershed management as a regime and way of doing things in BC hasn't really landed, like, unfortunately. Like, everything I hear about the way it's done in Washington and Oregon, and I'm sure you guys could correct me and I make it sound with ruby glasses or something like that, but like, we don't really even talk about watershed management up here. There's a really great effort being led to try and make that happen. The Watershed Security Coalition and the Watershed Security Fund that was released, started getting released last year. So, I mean, those are great starts, but like, as a regime of how you actually think about watersheds, we are like really far away from figuring that out, I would say, up here in the Lower Mainland and BC. Unfortunately, sorry, I hope I'm not being too dour here.
No, but it points to the need of really getting organized and change things because this cannot continue, in my opinion.
Oh, and I should point out some great initiatives, and I saw like Murray Ned from the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. Like, this is a huge opportunity, so I should think about the opportunities, but like starting to think about, doing it from a First Nations led perspective and getting a handle on these things. And I think that's really the direction that we got to go up here.
Good to be set up for success, for sure. All right, Lori, do you want to ask one of our final questions?
Let's take that one at the top. And I'm curious as well, just the idea that maybe where you can't do a replacement or a big upgrade, you've got a top hinge tide gate you're stuck with. Has anyone on the panel had experience with the use of passive fish ladders or any other sort of fishways adjacent to these barriers to improve passage? If you've had any experience, please share thoughts.
Not associated with these structures, because normally you don't have the water level difference to really even think about a traditional fish ladder. You need a dam that builds a wall of water, and then you get the fish with the fish ladder up to the new level. But fish ladders themselves are imperfect structures, and they present a lot of challenges, and they are species selective. We've been coming over time with slightly better and better designs. Naturalized fishways is something that has come up in the last 10 years, probably. But I think it would be better to just focus on the structure that is the problem rather than put another structure next to it that is going to present another problem, thinking that it's going to solve the problem you had there in the first place. So I would like to see an example if it exists around the world, but I think it's not the way to go.
Okay, yeah,
thanks.
Go ahead.
I'll bring up one like technology that I've heard of, and I'm really interested to like learn more about and hear if it's being used elsewhere. But I've seen a few times where basically a pretty small pipe is used alongside a floodgate, and so that pipe is really allowing like a continuous flow. And what I've heard from some experts in both Sacramento and up here, like they noticed that fish are pretty good at finding these little pipes. They can find that flow and they can ride it in. So that's what I've heard. But so I think that this is a possible thing. You'd have to stick it through a dike is the only issue, and that's not always easy to do. Yeah.
No issue.
Fair enough. No, appreciate your addressing that question there. We've just we're kind of winding down. Please, those folks who are still online, feel free to upvote questions that you see sitting in the Slido that you're curious to know the answers to, or pop ones that have just been burning in the back of your mind. And I'll pass it to Greer. We'll at least get to one more question before we wrap up today.
Yeah, well, and I guess it came through in all the questions before, but just to dig in a little more to what Dan said too, you know, there's obviously a lot of innovation going on in this area, especially with the engineering and design. So we've mentioned a few, and then a few have come through in the Slido, but I mean, how does someone who's out there trying to figure out what to do, I mean, how do you navigate that? Where do you go to get information about these? I mean, it sounds like YouTube and then in some cases the company, but how do you navigate that as someone who's trying to figure out what's the latest and greatest and what are my options? I don't see a lot of consultants specializing on this. So what would you do? What advice do you have to give them besides just calling you up and picking your brain as a practitioner?
I would say one thing is with some of the information we've been able to provide on the timing of fish movement. I mean, Guillermo, you've been in this game for 20 years. How much would you have liked to know when fish are trying to move through a gate? So I think that we're producing some publications through UBC, and also we've got partnerships with Guillermo, and we're collaborating with Jason as well. We're trying to provide information on what are the important things to consider when thinking of fish movement through tide gates. And I think that information just hasn't existed. It hasn't been, we haven't had the kind of research that we're trying to produce, this sort of gold standard of monitoring. And I think that information will go a long way in designing, not only improving the designs of infrastructure, but also providing evidence for people to go forward to get funding. You know, we've got evidence now that self-regulating gates provide a serious improvement to fish passage compared to a top-mounted gate. I don't know if there hasn't been any research prior to that actually had concrete evidence of that, and that, you know, to Jason's point, leveraging this information to provide more funding and more evidence of the importance of this work through these publications. I think that's one way that we're trying to get out there and inform people as to what the designs are and how they actually work relative to how fish work.
Great.
And I would say I don't want anybody to walk away from this thinking that we have the technology down pat. I think there are better and more available or future technologies out there. And I'm not sure that we have the right organizations working on it right now. I think we need more engineers and fabricators to take a look at this. Look at the panel that you drew here today. Who has an engineering background? Raise your hand. Yeah. Maybe we need a design competition to see new ideas. So I think we can only go but.
Yep. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. I would just add, like, yeah, that's exactly. I've had a dream of like getting a design jam going, but I didn't really know enough about the problem. But I think it's safe to say, just like Jason's saying, like nobody can really say they're really the expert at the real design here. And it's like I said in that slide, it's a Wild West situation. Like people are trying all sorts of things. So we're really at almost you could say the infancy of what the solution should look like. It's an exciting opportunity, but it's also a daunting one. Like one approach that could be taken, but I don't think we have the solutions, like Jason's saying, is like going towards a standardized process, but or standardized designs. But in the meantime, it's like webinars like this, and just have to reach out to us to talk to us anecdotally about what our experience has been with X or Y gate. So
Yeah, it feels a lot like where we were with fish screens not that long ago, trying different types of fish screens and seeing what worked and really having a lot of leadership on trying different designs. But yeah, we've moved towards more of a standard of practice with fish screens, so we could get there. Yeah, I mean, the last question Laura and I thought we might ask, so we haven't talked about, and we don't have a lot of time, so if you can keep it brief, but we haven't talked about differences among species. And obviously, there's differences among species in terms of their reliance on estuary habitat within their life stages. But any thoughts on considering different life stages and species and how we approach this work? Go ahead, Guillermo.
Yeah, well, that is super important, and we know, or we put a lot of emphasis, the few people that pay attention to it, on the use of estuarine habitats by Chinook, because we are more familiar with the life history. I just wanted to put a plug for the use of estuarine habitat by coho. We kind of came up to the conclusion that in reality, what Chaplinsky discovered in Vancouver Island in 1982, that there were coho leaving the system in the first summer of life and moving into the estuary when they should have waited a year if they had read the textbooks, was not an abnormality. We found that in Coos and along the coast of Oregon. There are several publications that I list in my references. And basically, these fish move out with the smolts of the previous generation. And they spend the summer in the estuary. And when things get tough in the winter, they move upstream back into the river. And that's where upstream movement that is basically blocked by tide gates for very small fish becomes a problem for them. They are really seriously affected. And they are not a small part of the population. That life history, according to a couple of publications and a master's thesis of a student of mine, is about 20% of the coho salmon populations in the small coastal streams along the coast of Oregon and Washington. So by canceling the opportunity or reducing the opportunity of those fish to move back into freshwater and leave again as smolts, as any decent smolt would do the following year, we are creating a problem. But we are not very cognizant about the use of that type of habitat by coho in general when we design these things. Then there are a number of other estuarine species that migrate into freshwater. Eulachon is one of them that has been given no attention whatsoever. And they disappear from the lower reaches of small creeks of the coast as soon as you have a tide gate that doesn't have any leakage or connection in terms of water chemistry between the below and above part of the system. So yeah, you saw the list of species that we just found in Coos Bay that were either passing through a tide gate and they like the estuarine conditions above because the tide gate was leaky, and the ones that, because the tide gate didn't allow any salt intrusion above, basically weren't absent. And we're talking about a good 15 or 20 species in many cases. So salmon is not the only one that we should be paying attention to, although everybody's particularly concerned about them, of course, and the money is there, we know.
I have to put a plug in for Pacific lamprey. We haven't even begun to understand
Yes.
the movement.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, we're slowly transitioning into a lamprey research group, us four. We've learned that everything that works for a juvenile salmon, it does not work for lamprey. So like fish ladders, fish ways, anything with a corner. I mean, it's unbelievable how different fish movement is upstream through structures for lamprey. So all of us in our spare time are becoming lamprey experts.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I'll let Laura wrap us up, but I just want to say personally, I've learned a lot today, and I so appreciate your time. We've just put together such a stellar group here, and I just really want to express my appreciation on behalf of everyone who's been listening today. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Greer. We're out of time, but Greer and I are both feeling like our list of questions that we wanted to ask barely was touched, and I know there were a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to today, but we've done our best to sort of manage and curate the questions that came in and really move this workshop through some meaningful topics and issues. I hope it's been of value to everybody online. It's certainly been a huge, valuable learning experience for me, and thank you so much to our speakers who've made this made the job for Greer and I so easy in putting this together, because you guys really know your stuff, you know each other, and you work so well together, and it's been a pleasure to work with you and getting this workshop to this closing point. I'll also just acknowledge the Oh Boy Productions team, who as always just does an amazing job at putting these workshops together and making us all look good up here, and things running so smoothly. To Max and Natalie, my colleagues who've been behind the scenes and managing the Slido through the afternoon, great thanks to you. And to Greer, it's been great having you here co-moderating today. So everybody online, thank you so much for joining. We're going to just put a quick closing slide up with a survey. If you're still with us, feel free to just grab your phones and you can QR code that to get to the survey link. I'll also send it in an email tomorrow. So please share your thoughts as we continue to work through topics that are relevant to you and of interest, and to just make this workshop series as valuable as we can. And a last plug for our workshop coming up in November. That's on the November 18th, and it's really going to be carrying on the conversation that's been seeded today around the importance of floodplains and how we best go about restoring those habitats in highly occupied landscapes. So we look forward to having you join us then. Thanks, everybody.